I'm Perry Stone. Welcome to this very special videotape on the mystery of fallen angels, giants, and evil spirits. Let me set out the foundation at the very beginning. We're going to prove, I believe, today on this teaching video, three things. Number one, we're going to show you the proof of the existence of fallen angels. We're going to show you, hopefully, by this teaching, how that fallen angels came into the daughters of men and produced a race of giants, and how upon the death of those giants, they became the evil spirits that the New Testament talks about. Now, before you say, "No, Brother Stone, that's way out there. I've never heard that before." Well, you have to do in-depth historical research and word studies from the Bible to paint this entire picture. That's what we're about to do today. And I'm going to tell you something. It is a very unique teaching, to say the least. When man fell in the Garden of Eden, in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, the Lord gave a prophecy. It's the first prophecy in the Bible, and here's what it says. "I will put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." I want to let that be the foundational, I guess you could say, scripture of this study today, about the seed of the serpent, how the woman had a seed that would crush the seed of the serpent. Now the question is, what was the seed of the serpent? If we go back before the creation of man, we discover that the spirit world was created. God created angels before He ever created Adam. Now, in the beginning of time, we understand from reading this prophetic scripture and reading the words of the prophets, Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 14, that there was an anointed cherubim. And that anointed cherubim was Satan. We know that in Ezekiel 28, verse 17, that this angel, this great angel, fell because of pride and because of his beauty. We know, according to Luke 10:18, that Lucifer, or Satan, was cast out of heaven. We also know by Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 through 4, that when Satan fell from heaven, he took 1/3 of the angels of God with him. These are called the fallen angels. So we know by studying the Word of God that that is an event which literally happened in biblical history. Now, if we go from the fall of Adam in the book of Genesis chapter 3 to the time of Noah in Genesis chapter 6, you have about 1,658 years or so that has passed. Please keep that in mind. In that time frame, here's what happened. Genesis 6, 1 through 4. "It came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he is also flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. And there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare the same, and they bare them sons. The same were mighty men, which were of old, men of renown." Now, I'll probably elaborate on this later on, but the phrase "sons of God" is B'nai Elohim, and when it's found in the Scripture, it actually refers to angels of God. And we'll elaborate on that a little bit later on. Now, here's the 3 points I want to make from Genesis chapter 6, 1 through 4. Number one, there were a race of giants in the earth in the Old Testament time. Number two, these giants, according to the Scripture, were born to the daughters of men. And number three, it took the sons of God coming into the daughters of men to produce this race of giants. Now, I have often taught, when I've been able to teach this particular teaching, that the seed of the serpent, the seed of Satan, were the giants. Please keep that in mind. The seed of the serpent, Genesis 3:15, were the race of giants that existed on the earth. Now, the Bible plainly teaches that in the Old Testament time, these giants existed. Very large men, of very huge stature. Some 12, 14, some may have even been 18 feet tall. Let's look at some scripture here. Numbers chapter 13, verse 33. I'm going to give you 7 references. There's actually more than this in the Old Testament. 7 references that speaks of giants that used to exist in the Promised Land back in the time of Moses. Here's what it says, Numbers 13. "And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which were of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight." Deuteronomy chapter 2. "The Emims dwell therein in past, a people great and many and tall as the Anakims, and also were accounted giants as the Anakims, but the Moabites call them Emims." Deuteronomy chapter 2. "That also accounted a land of giants. Giants dwelt therein in old time, and the Amorites call them Zamzumims, a people great and many." Notice that, "and many and tall as the Anakims. But the Lord destroyed them before them, and they succeeded them and dwelt in their stead." Deuteronomy chapter 3 says, For only Og, king of Bashan, remaineth of the remnant of the giants. Behold, his bedstead was a bedstead of iron. Is it not in Rabbath of the children of Ammon? 9 cubits was the length thereof, and 4 cubits the breadth thereof, after the cubit of a man. Now, depending on if this was 18 or 25 inches, Og's bed may have been 18 feet long, and that's 3 times taller than I am. I'm about 6 foot tall. Think about that. Here we go. Deuteronomy chapter 3, And the rest of Gilead and all Bashan, being the kingdom of Og, and this is that great giant king that existed in the Old Testament time, gave I half the tribe of Manasseh, all the region of Argob and all Bashan, which was called the land of the giants. So in Moses' time, the land of Bashan was called the land of the giants because there were so many giants that lived in that area. Here is another reference in Joshua chapter 12. And the coast of Og, king of Bashan, which was of the remnant of the giants that dwelt at Ashtaroth and Edrei, and reigned in Mount Hermon, and in Salcah, and in all Bashan, under the border of the Girgashites, and the Mahakathites, and half of Gilead, the border of Shihon of Heshbon. Joshua chapter 15. And the border went up by the valley of the sons of Hinnom, under the south side of the Jebusite, the same as Jerusalem. And the top of the mountain that lieth before the valley of Hinnom westward, which is at the end of the valley of the giants northward. So, folks, if we go to the Old Testament back in the time of Moses, we discover that these giants were literally all over the Promised Land. They were on the southern end, which was the Gaza area. They were at the western end, which was the area of Jordan. They were on the eastern end, which was Jerusalem. They were in the northern end, which is the area of Bashan. And some of the names in Deuteronomy chapter 2 were Anakims, Emims, Rephaim, Avim, and Zamzumim. Aren't you glad we don't name our kids, use those names in naming our children? Now, the Bible indicates that these different names were used. You know, the Canaanites may have called the giants one name. The Amorites may have used another name to describe them. And that's what it says in the Scripture here. So here's where they dwelt. Now, we find out we have different names mentioned in the Old Testament for these races of giants. But here's where they dwelt. The Anakims, this is from Deuteronomy chapter 2, by the way, if you're keeping up with this. The Anakims possessed the country of Hebron, Debir, and Anak. The Emims possessed the country beyond the Jordan River. The Rephaim took possessions of the valley of Rephaim, which was actually in the area of Jerusalem. The Avim possessed the Mediterranean coast, and the Zamzumim possessed the areas around the country of Jordan. Now, geographically speaking, and maybe we can kind of throw a map up here to show this, in the area in the northern part of Israel, which is today called the Golan Heights, is an area where Og and the king of Bashan, as he was called, ruled in the time of Moses. To the eastern region is Edom, Moab, and Ammon, and this is the present-day country of Jordan. To the southern region is Gath and Gaza, and it's the area that is bordering Israel in the south. And so I want you to see something here, and I've often preached this, that the giants in the Old Testament time actually possessed the gates of the Holy Land. They possessed the gates of Israel. All the entrances into the Promised Land, there was a race of giants that were there. To the south, there was a road that came from Egypt south through Gaza, and there was a race of giants there. On the side of Jordan, which is Ammon and Moab and Edom, there was a race of giants there. The Bashan area, of course, had roads running from Lebanon and Syria into Israel. There were giants there. And, of course, Jerusalem, on the west side of Jerusalem, was the valley of Rephaim, or the valley of giants. And so it appears to me that the giants were, as we said earlier, the seed of the serpent, and we'll explain that later on in a moment, so just hang with us. They were the seed of the serpent, and what they were used for was to try to control the gates leading into the Promised Land, and also to try to hinder God's people. We know that the children of Israel would not even possess the Promised Land when they came out of Egyptian bondage, because the Bible says they saw the sons of Anak there. This was a giant. And they were very fearful at their size, and they said, we look like grasshoppers to these guys. They're so large, they're so huge. And so they would not take the Promised Land. And literally the seed of the serpent, or the giants, hindered people all the way back in the time of before the flood of Noah. The Bible said man's imaginations were evil continually. Violence filled the earth. And a lot of this, as we're going to show you, was a result of the fallen angels and the giants that existed back in that time prior to the flood. And there were giants in the earth, according to Genesis chapter 6, both before the flood and after the flood. And we'll explain in a moment why that is so. But these giants did exist. That's what I want you to know. I want to emphasize that. These giants did exist according to Scripture. Now, Is there any evidence? Do we have any evidence at all, besides just from reading Scripture? Is there any historical evidence that these giants existed? And the answer is absolutely yes. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to give you a list of about 4 different sources that go back to about 1,900 years, 2,000 years, 2,100 years ago. Some sources a little bit older than that. And I'm going to share these sources with you to help you understand that there was a great understanding not only of a race of giants that existed, but listen to this carefully, there was also a great understanding of how those giants came into existence through fallen angels having intercourse with the daughters of men. Now there again, I know automatically what some of you are thinking. Well, in heaven, angels are not married nor given in marriage, and I know what you're going to say. We're going to answer all that. Don't get ahead of me. Follow me. Don't get ahead of me, but follow me, and we'll build the pattern, and we'll answer a lot of those questions I know some of you have and coming up in just a few moments. Now, Josephus was an historian that lived about well over 1,900 years ago, and here's what he wrote. For which reason they removed their camp to Hebron. He's talking about the children of Israel. When they had taken it, they slew all the inhabitants there, till then left a race of giants who had bodies so large and countenances so entirely different from men that they were terrible to the hearing. The bones of these men are still shown to this very day, unlike any credible relations of other men. So Josephus in Book 5, Chapter 2 tells you that there was a race of giants whose countenances were so large and their bodies were so large and their voices, his implication is when they would speak, it would even hurt your ears. And in his day, which is well over 1,900 years ago, he tells you, and apparently it was at Hebron, that the bones of these giants were on display to, let's say a little over 1,900 years ago. Now think about that. The bones were on display. Now naturally, after a period of 1,500, 2,000 years, bones are going to deteriorate. And so one day they may find in an excavation, and we're going to talk about where they actually have, not necessarily in Israel, found bones that were very large of human beings. All right, now, there may be, and this is real important, that there may be visible evidences that you can take and look at that you can say, hey, this could be an evidence of a race of giants that helped build this or lived here at one time. Now, I've been to Israel many times. As a matter of fact, I've just about lost count. I think I've been 21 or 22 times now. And one of the interesting things I came across years ago, we're going to show you in just a moment, in the Golan Heights area. But let me give you some things that are very interesting. Ancient cities in the Middle East, especially in northern Israel, Syria, and Lebanon. Now, in Abraham's time, this is back in the book of Genesis, early in the book of Genesis. In Abraham's time, these giants surrounded the Promised Land. In Genesis chapter 14, this is the time of Abraham, verse 5, it mentions a king that smote the Rephaims in Ashtoreth, and the Zuzims in Ham, and the Emims in the Shavah Kirihaim. Now, if you will look at Genesis chapter 14, verse 5, you will discover that these names like Emims, Rephaim, and Zuzims are actually names for giants. And so in Genesis chapter 14, there were wars taking place with kings battling these race of giants and actually destroying them and trying to kill them. Now, there are ruins of gigantic proportions that stagger the imaginations up into the area of Syria, Lebanon, and even parts of Israel. In the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon, there are buildings and stones and temples that are so massive that some suggest that they cannot even be duplicated. In the Acropolis of Baalbek, a temple was built to the storm god Hadad. It was 60 feet wide and 290 feet long, surrounded by 19 columns, each column 62 feet high and over 7 feet in diameter. The flooring stones are much larger than modern boxcars. Now, the suggestion here is that it would take a race of very large men, because they didn't have cranes back then, they didn't have the modern equipment that we have. It would take a race of very large men to place these monuments intact. Number 2, the ancient cities in the Golan Heights are in the area of Beishan. Now, if you ever go to the Golan Heights, if you've ever been there, the area is basically covered with a black volcanic type of rock called a basalt stone. And there are ancient towns that were built out of these rocks. You can see some of the ruins of those towns that are about 2,000 years of age or even older. One example is the area of Chorazim, where we often take people on a tour. You can see that black basalt rock, how it was used to build the entire city of Chorazim, how it was used to build the synagogue. You can see that same kind of stone at the area of Bethsaida. You can see that same type of stone in certain parts of the area of Capernaum, all around the Galilee area. When you go up into the Golden Heights of Israel, you see these stones. Now, let me say something to you. There was a gentleman, a doctor, a professor by the name of Dr. Epstein, that said an extraordinary civilization once existed in the Bashan or Golden Heights area about 4,000 years BC. Of course, they say BCE, but we say BC, which is before Christ. Now, there are evidence of 25 cities that existed at one time in the upper Bashan area. And there are also ruins that have been found from Abraham's time. I remember one time being on a tour to Israel, getting ready to baptize our people in the Jordan River. And we came to an area where we were turning in the road, and Gideon, our guide, said, look over here on the left side, and there were ruins. Now, it wasn't like stone monuments and wood or anything, but you could see where it was carved out, and there was a lot of mud bricks. He said, this is called the City of the Moon. It was discovered recently, and it is a city that dates back to the time of Abraham. So, in other words, when you go into the Holy Land, I remember one time showing my guide a coin. I said, Gideon, look at this coin. It's 105 years old. He opens up his wallet and he whips out a big silver coin with the face of Alexander the Great on it. He says, Petty, look at this coin. It's 2,300 years old. And so we don't have anything over here to compare to the age of what you find in Israel. But nonetheless, if you go to the upper Golden Heights area, you'll find evidence of what could have been, and I personally believe it was, structures that may have been built by giants. One of those structures, and you see many of these when you go into the Golden Heights area, is called a dolmen. And it's in the upper area of the Golden Heights, which again, remember this, was the ancient area of Bashan back in the time of Moses. Now, what is a dolmen? Well, it comes from two words. It comes from the word dol, which means table, and min, which means stone, and it actually means a stone table. There are over 3,000 of these stone monuments in the Golden Heights. We're going to show you one right now. Some of these monuments are so large that it would take a small crane to even move them, and they have been dated back 3,500 years before the time of Christ to about 100 years before the time of Christ. We say 3,000 years, let's say 2,000 to 3,000 years before the time of Christ, up to 100 years before the time of Christ. Let me get that corrected. Now, when we talk about these dolmens, there's basically three kinds. And by the way, you'll find out that not only do you find these in Israel, you find these in Stonehenge, England, you find these in Ireland, etc. But there's three kinds. Number one, there's the kind that is just a real tall rock. Back here in my studio, I have a column. It's just, of course, you wouldn't know this, but this is styrofoam. But I have a column right here behind me. And this column would be like a dolmen. There are dolmens that are just straight up, and you find one here, one here, one here, one here, one there. And those are one type of dolmen. The second type of dolmen are circle stones. And once again, in the Golden Heights area, and one time we took a tour bus there, I think it was about 1995, with our good friend from Florida, from Brooksville Assembly of God, Pastor Garcia with his people. We took a tour bus way into the Golden Heights into what is called the Tel Raphaim. Tel Raphaim. The word tel means a mound or a hill, and Raphaim is a Hebrew word for giants. And it literally was the tell of the giants. And right directly across from us, you could see Mount Hermon. And there's a real interesting story connecting the fallen angels to Mount Hermon. So there, right in front of our view, is the snow-capped Mount Hermon in the northern part of Israel. And here are these huge circle stones, just a huge circle of stones. Now, again, these are also found in places like Ireland, Stonehenge, England, places of this nature. And there are 5 circles of stones with a line of walls that are made of stones from that area. The center platform is 6 feet high, and there's a small tunnel in the middle. One time a year, light hits this tunnel and forms a perfect alignment. Now, it appears from what we were told that when the spring planting season comes, when I think it's in sometime in the month of March, that's when that light hits in that area and reflects out the other end. In other words, it's a certain chamber that is built out of these rocks. So it is believed that it may have been built for agricultural purposes, but once again, it could be evidence of those race of giants that lived and existed in that area. You know, Mount Hermon is very unique because Mount Hermon, when we were standing there that day at these circle stones, Gideon told me, he said, you know, it's a tradition that Nimrod, who built Babylon, is buried there on top of Mount Hermon. And I didn't know that. But it also is a place where the second group of fallen angels allegedly came to earth after the flood of Noah. We'll get into that in just a minute. So we see here now we've got evidence of dolmens, which are these large stones that normal-sized men would have had difficulty moving them, but it may be an evidence of giants. We discover circle stones, which again are found in areas where allegedly giants one time existed. And there's, so many different things of this nature. Now, these structures, by the way, these dolmens, these stone tables, these circle stones, things of this nature are found in different parts of the world. They're found in Stonehenge, England. They were built about 3,500 to 1,000 years before the birth of Christ. There are circle stones in Stonehenge, England, over 100 foot in diameter. Stone walls on that circle stones there up to 30 feet tall. There are stones that have been erected that weigh up to 12 tons each. Now imagine a group of men our size trying to move without modern cranes or equipment, stones that weigh 12 tons each. But what if you have a guy that's 14 foot tall, that's twice the strength of a normal man, or even larger, and you have a whole group of them? It would make it somewhat easier for them to deal with something of this nature. Other locations of these large dolmen stones, over 50,000 known structures of these unique stones are found in Europe, Northern Africa, Britain, Ireland, Spain, Portugal, France, Scandinavia, and Algeria. There is a legend among the Irish that a race of Irish giants brought these stones from Africa. In other words, from Africa they brought these large dolmens and brought them into the area of Ireland. Now once again, I'm sharing this with you to help you understand that there seems to be a universal understanding and a belief of a race of beings that one time existed that were very huge and very large, and how these particular structures found throughout the world could be evidence of how these individuals called giants one time helped build these structures. And literally giants were universal. I mean, they were in the promised land, we know, after the flood, but before the flood they were all over the earth, all over the known world. Now here's another thing I want to share with you, which is evidence. Prints have been found in the United States. In the Grand River in South Dakota, a man's print was found which was 18 inches long and 4 inches wide. And this was during an excavation. This person would stand between 12 to 15 feet tall. So apparently at one time here on our continent, there were men who lived here that were that size. Now we have to keep in mind while I'm talking about this that at one time, even scientists have proven this, all the continental plates were together. So someone may be sitting there thinking, well, how would a giant leave Europe or the Holy Land and get to America by a boat? We wouldn't have to, because way in the ancient time, we know that these plates were all together and men could just go from one continent to the other. And the Bible says in Genesis chapter 11 that it names a man by the name of Peleg. And it says in Peleg's day the earth was divided. And some Christians who are scientists have talked about that and how the continental plates are actually floating. And so that is probably how we would have had some of those giants in what we today call the continent of the United States or the continent of America. There are flint tools that were found in Ain Fretisa in East Morocco that were 12 inches long, 8 inches wide, and weighed 9 pounds. It would take a being about 12 foot tall to handle these. Now, while I'm talking about this, let me also bring out that according to Dr. Carl Baugh, who is a wonderful Christian man who is a scientist. He's been on Marcus and Joni Lamb Station, Trinity Broadcasting. I think he's been on TCT, a number of other networks. They have discovered both human and dinosaur prints in limestone in the Paluxy River. Also, other evidence indicates that, of course, these particular prints were made, according to Dr. Baugh, under great hydraulic pressure of flood waters, and it proves that dinosaurs and humans existed at the same time. 57 human prints, 192 dinosaur prints. Some of the human prints were 22 inches long. The hand was 20% larger that was discovered. There was a hand print discovered. It was 20% larger than a normal print. And also, an 11.5-foot tall skeleton was found in a mine in Italy. The skeleton of a man was found in a mine in Italy. And some of the sources here are World Book Encyclopedia, Lockman Foundation, Field Enterprises, Educational Corporation, and so forth. And sometimes, people write me and say, where'd you get your information? Well, sometimes we get so much information that through research and study that it becomes very hard for me to go back and write all the emails and letters and things of this nature. But we will try our best from time to time to let you know where information comes from, and go to the internet, and go to the library and look it up, and so on and so forth. Now, in 1 Samuel chapter 17, here's what I want to show you. Let's go over here. Get ready for this, guys. There was a man by the name of Goliath. And let me tell you a little bit about Goliath. The Bible says that Goliath was a giant that King David fought. In fact, this is really before David was a king. He had just been anointed with oil by Samuel. And David went to battle, and he fought Goliath. And it says Goliath was 6 cubits and a span in height. Now, if a cubit was 25 inches, this is amazing, and a span is about 10 inches, then that means that Goliath was 13 foot 4 inches tall. Now, some estimate 11 feet, some say 12 feet, some say 13 feet. Probably at the most, he's 13 feet tall. According to the Dake's Bible, the Dake's Annotated Bible, page 310, and this is in a commentary on Goliath in 1 Samuel chapter 17. Goliath's armor, listen to this, weighed 194 pounds total, because the Bible tells you about it there in 1 Samuel 17. His spearhead alone weighed 23 pounds. And the shield bearer, he had a shield bearer. In other words, he didn't carry his own shield. He had somebody carrying his shield before him. I asked our good friend Scott Radcliffe, who is on staff here, to build for me a replica of what it would have looked like or what David would have seen in Goliath's day. Now, I want you all to look at this. This is a sandal. I tell you, I was on a trip to Israel and did an excavation. No, not really. Now, if I was in Israel with a bunch of folks, we'd be cutting up right now about this. This is a sandal. Now, I want you to look at this. Can you see this sandal? And I'm in sand, and I don't want to do this. But I'm going to try to put my shoe inside that shoe, and I want you to look at this. Can you all see that? This is my shoe right here. There's that sandal. I wear about a size 10. Now, that right there is at least how big the foot of Goliath was. Now, I want you to take a look at this thing. That's about how big the foot of Goliath was. Now, I'm going to tell you something. Shaquille O'Neal has got some big feet, but he didn't quite make it there. Now, that is huge. Now, over here, I'm going to save the best for last, but over here, and this is pretty heavy, I'm going to show you something about this. This is like a shield. I had Scott build this, and we took this from pictures that we had in old books and things of this nature from different time periods. Now, this here, this one in the middle is the size of a normal man's shield. See this one in the middle? In other words, back in that day, if the Philistines were fighting the Hebrews, this is about the size. This would be about the size of Goliath's shield. Now, he had a shield bearer. That means that he had somebody to go before him to protect him. He would turn to the left and turn to the right to protect this giant. So look at this. Look, I'm 6 foot tall. Look how big the shield of Goliath would have been. And no wonder that he had to have somebody to carry the shield for him because of the size of it. Now, let me get this right back in here, and then I'm going to show you the one piece that I'm really excited about.